Oba Kamanu sat in his lavish study, staring at the physician's letter trembling in his hand, unable to process the brutal words inked on the page, a diagnosis of terminal pancreatic cancer, stage 4, and barely a month left to live. His mind whirled as he read it again and again, refusing to believe something so final could be real, especially when he felt perfectly healthy. His body was strong, his voice steady, his steps firm, his hair untouched by illness. How could this be possible, he wondered, when his recent health screening in the capital city of Umudalu had revealed nothing? Yet the thought that truly gripped his heart was not the illness itself, but the possibility of leaving behind his beloved wife, Adana, and their little boy, Chijioke. For they were his heartbeat, the joy of his days, and he couldn't bear the idea of abandoning them to the merciless world. Worse yet was the fear of what would happen once his sisters, Ngozi and Amaka, took hold of everything, because they'd never approved of Adana, mocking her humble roots, questioning her worthiness for years, and Oba Kamanu had often overlooked their poisonous remarks for peace's sake. But now his spirit knew they might strip Adana and Chijioke of everything after his passing. He needed to know what would become of his family when he was gone, and as the fear brewed, a daring thought surfaced. What if he could test them before death came? What if he staged his demise to watch their true colors unfold? At first, the idea of faking his death felt cruel, even mad, but with each passing hour it became clear it was the only way to protect those he loved. And so, days later, Kamanu was found collapsed in his office, cold and motionless over his desk. The medics arrived, rushed him to Ezi General Hospital, and moments later he was pronounced dead. Adana's world shattered at that moment, her screams echoing through the corridors as she held their son close, tears streaming endlessly, her body refusing food for days until the cries of her son reminded her she was his only lifeline. The funeral came like a storm of sorrow, and she stood dazed beside the casket, unable to fathom that her protector was gone, her body trembling as little Chijioke clung to her fingers, sensing a grief too heavy for his years, while she tried to mask her broken heart with a mother's strength. But as the mourners departed through the red earth path of Okon Cemetery, Adana noticed something chilling. Ngozi and Amaka, standing beneath a palm tree, whispering with the faintest smirks, their eyes sharp not with sorrow but something else, something sinister. Their glance at Adana carried no warmth, only calculation, and as Adana stepped into the family car, a deeper unease wrapped around her soul. It turned into horror when she arrived at the family estate's iron gates and found them locked. Shocked, she called the longtime guard, Madu, her voice cracking. "Open the gate, please," but his tone was nervous as he replied, "I'm sorry, madam. I've been instructed not to let you in." Lady Ngozi and Lady Amaka said the house. "Say is no longer yours. It belongs to them now." And Adana's breath caught, her hands shaking, her voice rising in disbelief. "What are you saying?" "This is my husband's house. He left it for us. Open this gate." But Madu's silence only deepened the chill that had already settled in her bones. The guard's voice was firm. "I'm sorry, madam. I can't let you in. I was ordered to lock the gate." And with that, Adana stood frozen outside her own home, the betrayal crashing over her like a violent wave. The mansion that had once echoed with laughter was now closed to her, and in that moment she realized she had nothing. No family, no savings, no roof to shield her or Chijioke. All that Oba Kamanu had built was now in the cold hands of Ngozi and Amaka, who had stripped her of not only access to the home, but even the right to attend the funeral's reception, leaving her in silence with her son and heartbreak as her only companions. Adana steadied herself, her breath trembling, and with her son tied to her back, she walked away from the gates, the vast and unknown streets of Enugu opening before her, unforgiving, unfamiliar, buzzing with strangers who didn't know her pain. She moved past fruit stalls, clashing buses, vendors calling prices, but none of it reached her senses fully. She was a widow in exile, navigating life with only the weight of a child and the memory of love to guide her. As she wandered, her eyes landed on a weathered sign posted on a tan building's wall that read, "Ulo Nwanyi, a local center for women in crisis." With no other option, she stepped toward the gate and rang the bell, and after a pause, a gentle voice greeted her. "How can I help you?" And Adana's lips quivered as she said, "Please, I need help. My husband is gone and his sisters have taken everything." The woman, whose name was Mama Ifeoma, ushered her inside and listened with a growing frown as Adana explained every cut of cruelty, every door slammed in her face, every fear of how to feed Chijioke, her voice hoarse from grief, her body weary from wandering. Later that evening, after laying her son down in a small room, Adana sat with Mama Ifeoma again, whispering, "Why would they do this to me?" And the older woman responded, "Because some people hate what they can't control, but we won't let them win." The next day, Mama Ifeoma helped set up a live stream, and Adana shared her story with the world. The loss, the betrayal, the theft of her home, and the response was overwhelming. Strangers flooded in with messages and donations, and in a single day over 50 million naira was raised through a community fund, giving Adana a flicker of hope. For the first time since Kamanu's death, a belief that she and Chijioke could rebuild. But the storm was not over, and within days new winds began to blow. A video surfaced online, featuring Ngozi and Amaka sitting before the same mansion gates with smug smiles as they claimed Chijioke was not Kamanu's biological child, holding up forged documents and spewing venom. Through every word, "She lied to you all," Ngozi said. "That child was never my brother's," while Amaka added, "Kamanu knew everything. He stayed quiet because of shame, not love." And the video went viral, tearing through social media like wildfire, shattering support into camps of believers and doubters. Adana sat on a mat in her small room, watching it all unfold on her phone, her hands trembling, her soul aching as messages flooded in, some kind, others cruel, with many questioning her truth, her dignity, and even her child's right to exist. In the legacy Kamanu had left behind, her own credibility was under attack, and the once sympathetic online community began to waver, their support for Adana turning into suspicion. As the days passed, the pressure mounted unbearably, and though she tried to stay strong for Chijioke, the avalanche of lies, accusations, and character assassination from Ngozi and Amaka drained her spirit. How could the very people she once called family twist the knife so deep? They had taken her home, her stability, and now they were clawing at her dignity. But Adana refused to retreat, knowing she had to clear her name for herself and her son, though the path was blocked. Her late husband's sisters were stonewalling every effort, ignoring her pleas when she reached out again and again to request access to Kamanu's DNA so she could perform the one thing everyone asked for, a test to prove that Chijioke was truly his son. Still they refused, while Adana's inbox filled with messages from strangers urging her, "Take the DNA test," as if she hadn't tried, as if she wasn't desperate to end the nightmare. But she had no access to Kamanu's belongings, and no one to compel the sisters to comply. Then came another blow. Ngozi and Amaka released a second video, claiming Adana had refused the test and that they had been waiting for her to collect the samples, spinning a web of falsehoods. "She's hiding something," Amaka sneered. "If she wanted the truth, she would have come by now," while Ngozi nodded, smirking. "She knows that child isn't our brother's." The words struck Adana like fire, burning through what remained of her strength. And as the video went viral, public opinion grew divided, with many now questioning her honesty. But Mama Ifeoma, director of Ulo Nwanyi, had watched quietly from the start, storing every message, every screenshot, every unanswered request Adana had sent to the sisters, and she finally stepped in, releasing the evidence online, showing receipts of Adana's honest attempts and the sisters' silence, exposing their scheme to the world. The tide turned again. Furious support surged back toward Adana as people condemned the cruelty she had endured, demanding accountability and flooding the sisters with backlash. But the damage had already been done, and Adana, though vindicated, was emotionally exhausted from the unrelenting war. She felt like she'd aged a decade in a matter of weeks, fighting not just for her son's future, but for her own sanity. Still, Chijioke remained her reason to keep going, her anchor in the storm, and each day she walked with him to Kamanu's grave, her hands trembling as she told her boy stories of the man who had loved them both, only to be interrupted by the painful question, "Mama, when is Papa coming home?" A question that stabbed her heart anew every time, even as she whispered back, "Soon, my love, in dreams." At the grave, amidst the red clay and rustling palms, Adana found her only moments of peace, clinging to the memory of her husband as lies and betrayal chased her relentlessly. But just when it seemed she could not carry the weight any longer, everything changed again. On a quiet morning, her phone rang, and it was Barrister Okori, Kamanu's longtime lawyer, his voice taut with urgency. "Adana, there's something you must hear. Kamanu wasn't sick. The cancer diagnosis was wrong. The test results had been switched with someone else's." And as the words echoed in her ear, the world seemed to vanish beneath her feet, and all she could say was, "What? What are you saying?" While disbelief coursed through her like thunder. The results weren't meant for Oba Kamanu. They belonged to another man. He had never had cancer, never faced a terminal diagnosis, and the entire nightmare had been triggered by a devastating clerical error from the hospital in Umudalu, a case of mistaken identity. When Adana heard this from Barrister Okori, she sat motionless, the phone pressed against her cheek, her heart thudding like thunder in her ears. The idea that Kamanu had lived all this time, hiding in shadows, watching everything, was beyond comprehension. The grief she had endured, the humiliation, the isolation, all had been rooted not in fate but in a lie, a deliberate test orchestrated by the very man she had mourned. As she tried to breathe, rage mingled with disbelief. Why would he do this? To me, she thought, feeling as if her soul had been shattered by the one person she loved most, Kamanu's reason. She soon learned was simple and cruel. He had faked his death to test the loyalty of his sisters, not realizing the true cost would be Adana's trust, her peace, and her sanity. She had braved their cruelty, fought to protect Chijioke, and preserved Kamanu's memory like a sacred relic, only to learn that it had all been part of some twisted scheme. As news broke that the king was alive, the online world exploded. Outrage poured in, voices of shock, betrayal, and heartbreak filled every corner of social media, especially from those who had mourned with Adana and now felt deceived. Though Kamanu's sisters Ngozi and Amaka were finally exposed for their wickedness, and the world saw through their lies, the damage done to Adana's spirit was beyond repair. Kamanu too faced fierce backlash, his name dragged through digital flames, his face a symbol of betrayal. He had watched her suffer in silence, believing he was doing what was necessary, but now the weight of guilt was unbearable. Unable to rest, Kamanu found himself outside Adana's modest home days later, heart pounding with regret, ready to ask for forgiveness, though unsure he deserved it. When she opened the door, her face was gaunt and tired, the sadness in her eyes piercing, and as they stood in silence, Kamanu's voice finally cracked. "I'm so sorry, I thought I was protecting you, but I only brought you pain." Adana's eyes welled up as she whispered, "You should have trusted me. Instead, you left me drowning in grief to prove something I already knew." Kamanu tried to explain, "I didn't know how to trust anyone, not even you." But his voice broke as he reached for her hand. She pulled away. "I lost everything. Kamanu, our home, my peace, and my faith in you. And through it all I had to be strong for our son, while mourning a man who wasn't even dead." Kamanu's heart shattered at her words, the silence between them heavy until Adana finally looked up, her voice barely audible. "I don't know if I can forgive you, but I'll try. For Chijioke, he deserves his father." And as she opened her arms, not for reconciliation but for a second chance, Kamanu stepped in, and together they embraced, not with closure, but with the fragile beginning of healing. Ngozi and Amaka were exiled from their lives, their manipulation exposed, their access to the royal household cut off for good. Adana and Kamanu had a long road ahead, the pieces of trust needing gentle hands to mend, but they vowed to walk it together, and as they sat on a mat in their small garden, with Chijioke nestled between them, Kamanu whispered, "We'll survive. This, Adana, I'll never leave you again." And as a single tear rolled down her cheek, it wasn't sorrow, it was hope reborn.